Reading, especially if it's not your native language. I get it. Okay, Sarah started the recording, so I was just going to start the recording, but sounds good. It is good. Let me share my screen so that we can get started here. Now you should see my main screen over here. Do you see it? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm just making sure. It's every different video conferencing platform works a little bit differently. So I use Zoom, I use Meet, I use Teams, interchangeably depending on which meeting I have during the week. So I just want to make sure that that shares the screen the same way. But yeah, welcome again. People are dropping in here little by little. I actually opened the waiting room so that I don't have to click every time for people to come in. This way, it's easier. It doesn't get as distracting. So we get started. And again, feel free to interrupt me at any given time if you have any questions or anything that you want to emphasize more, or anything that you want to share. We'll talk about performance management and appraisal. I don't know if I told you before, but I have a really neat memory about the performance appraisals. When I lived in Chicago, I was invited to a lecture about this topic. In that they had a little bit like a lunch workshop kind of a thing, business leaders meeting where they did a lunch kind of a workshop, and they invited speakers there, and they invited me to speak there, and this was at Reverend Jackson's Rainbow Coalition, block away from Obama's house in Chicago. And if anybody knows Reverend Jackson, he's a famous civil rights leader who really has done a lot of good to promote equality and civil rights in the United States. He's very famous. And so when I was giving my lecture on performance appraisals, he came into the room, Reverend Jackson, and he stood there in the back of the room and listened to the presentation. And then afterwards, he had a few questions, and we talked about it a little bit. And then after that, he invited me to. They had the lunch afterwards that was a celebration of the day when he got arrested in the Chicago riots. So it was a celebration of the demonstrations that they did back in the 60s, I guess, or 70s, I don't know. And so anyway, every time when I talk about performance management, performance appraisal, go ahead, Ahmed. Huh? Huh? Yeah. Yeah, put me on a map. Yeah. But has anybody heard of Reverend Jackson? So yeah, he's very, very famous. I mean, he's not, he's not quite Martin Luther King, but he's famous kind of like that, and he's still alive. He's still in Chicago, and he has a organization called Rainbow Coalition, which really stands for equal rights and civil rights. And of course, he's African American. He's a Black person who's promoting rights for Black people. So yeah, it was just a great honor, to be part of it and to meet Reverend Jackson. And so anyway, I just wanted to tell you that story because every time I talk about this topic, that it brings me that memory. So we'll talk about performance appraisals today, and how to do them, what they are for, what are some important considerations, and really performance appraisal is just a really central to at least United States. Performance appraisal is something that we do regularly here in the United States. Now, I understand that some cultures like Japan, for example, do not do individual performance appraisals. And in some other cultures, they can be done a little bit differently that they are done in US. I think because United States is a very individualistic country. If you remember the Hofstede's dimensions, cultural dimensions, Hofstede said that there are individualistic countries and collective countries. Japan is an example of very collective countries where people are very group and team oriented. United States is a very individualistic country where people are very me and self-oriented. And so, United States, according to Hofstede studies, is the most individualistic country in the world where people are, more about themselves than the group. So Americans have to be taught teamwork. And of course, irony of that is that in sports, for example, Americans are actually extremely team oriented because they have been deliberately taught teamwork. And so it kind of flips around that, surprisingly, Americans can then be very team oriented. Same thing in the military and so forth. They focus on teamwork a lot. And in workplaces in the United States, there's a lot of focus on teams. But we have not gotten around to really do team appraisals in United States. We still do individual performance appraisals. And so it's important to think about and talk about this a little bit. So because it is very central in US culture to be doing this, and really it's the purpose for it is to set standards, set work standards. We talked about last week in training that you can't really expect people to do a good job if you don't train them to do a good job, and you have to always be able to differentiate between performance failures and training failures. Go ahead. Did somebody want to say something?
Please, your mic. Yes, your mic is vibrating. We are hearing you double. I can't really get you clear.
Does anybody else have the same problem?
No, we can hear you.
Okay, I don't know. Maybe if you put yourself in a mute, maybe it doesn't circle. But everybody else is hearing me okay?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, Professor.
Okay. Yeah, if you don't hear me okay, maybe log in and out or try muting yourself. That will help with the voice doesn't circle. So yeah, setting work standards is important. So there has to be a way to communicate to employee, what the standard is, what the expectation is, and then of course assessing performance. Again, you're assessing performance so that you can identify training needs. You can help to determine if there are performance deficiencies or if there are training needs, and most importantly, and this is the important part about it, it's an opportunity to provide feedback to the employee, because nobody can really improve their performance if they are not given constructive feedback about the performance. Now, that's why we need to talk about this, because in order for a person to receive that performance well, they have to receive it in a kind of a respectful, friendly, kind of a supportive kind of a manner. If the performance feedback is delivered in yes, Omar, absolutely, yes, it's done against the position description, job description, and that's a very good point. I mean, you're very smart. I'm jumping to it right away. We talk about that in a minute, because remember I told you all that job analysis is really like central to everything. That's why job analysis is such an important activity. Now here again, job analysis becomes extremely important, because if you have not done good job analysis, then you don't have a good, clear job description, which means that you now don't have work standards to assess somebody's performance against. And so how are you going to give them good feedback if you don't have a document that supports what that positive good performance should be? So yes, absolutely, that's a very, very good observation. So yes, the appraisals are used for a lot of purposes. Of course, it's used for pay, promotion, and retention decisions. Should we give you a pay raise? Should we give you promotion? Should we give you should we retain you? And that kind of stuff. And of course, like I said earlier, linking performance to management and company goals, and that's through the job analysis process, workflow goes into it. So how you tie performance into company's goals by doing that process really, really well. And this is an opportunity for the manager to correct deficiencies and to reinforce strengths. And so with appraisals, employees can also review their career plans. They can talk to their manager about what their career plans are, where they want to go in their career. And this is an opportunity to have that two-way discussion. So that's really the key over here, is that it has to be a two-way discussion. And performance management, we'll talk about that in a minute, is everybody's responsibility. So performance appraisals is not just something that manager does. It has to be something that is a two-way street, and that employee is also involved with, and that they have an opportunity to give feedback on their own performance, to share accomplishments, to provide information to the manager, and to do their own appraisal. So many times, the way performance appraisals work is that the employee is given an opportunity to first kind of do their self-assessment, and then the manager does their assessment, and then you compare, those, and you have a discussion about it. And manager has to be willing to be flexible and change the assessment if there is evidence to do so. So that's why we all in a workplace should be actively promoting ourselves. Not promoting like like self-promotion kind of a way, like sometimes people find it distasteful, but in a way, yes. You have to speak for yourself. Nobody else is going to speak for you. So if you receive an email from a customer, if you're in a customer related kind of job where you are treating customers, helping customers, if you receive an email from a customer saying thank you for your great performance, I was really, really happy with what you did, print it and put it in a folder. If so everything that you receive throughout the year that supports your good performance, it makes sense to save them in a folder, and so that you can refresh your own memory when you have a performance appraisal situation, and also you can refresh your manager's memory to tell your manager that, hey, look, I did really, really well here, and maybe you didn't notice that, because the reality of it is that managers often only remember sort of 3 months before the appraisals and maybe 3 months after. So there's an other 6 months between there that completely kind of gets forgotten. And sometimes it's not even 3 months, sometimes it's almost like a month. But that's just human nature. We remember immediate past, and we pay attention. We remember the effects of that performance appraisal for a month to 3 months, and then we kind of forget the whole thing and we move on if it's not reinforced regularly. That's why the best practice is not to do just one annual performance appraisal. It's always better to do at least two, and maybe even quarterly. But the reason that obviously companies don't do it that often is because it involves a lot of work. And so it takes away from productivity and performance when people have to concentrate on doing the appraisal. And so, and finally, of course, training needs have to be identified. So, this is an opportunity where you get information about what training needs to be done. Of course, the purpose, one purpose and opportunity with performance appraisal is to set goals where the manager and the employee can sit together and they can talk about the mutual goals. because good employee is able to align their personal goals with the organization's goals. And if there's an alignment with those goals, then everybody's moving to the right direction. Remember that motivation, because in organizational behavior course, we typically talk about motivation, and motivation is something that you can't snap your fingers and force another person to be motivated. I mean, everybody is motivated. We are all motivated. The problem is that we may not be motivated to do the same things what the organization wants you to do. You may be motivated to go to the beach. You may be motivated to go hiking. Um, you know, you may be motivated by, other things. And if the organization cannot provide you rewards for what your needs are, what motivates you, then and can figure out how you can motivate yourself in the workplace and in your job, then of course it's going to be difficult to perform if you are not motivated. And by the way, my opinion is that motivation is probably one of the most important type of things to study in, and it's one of the most important factors in human life. Everything involves motivation. Um, people who are highly successful, they are highly successful because they figured a way to motivate themselves. No matter what the obstacles, no matter how difficult it got, they were motivated to pursue, the right course of action and to learn and to take action and perform. So learning, for example, motivation is the most important part of learning. You are all here, listening to my bad accent because you're motivated to learn, because you're motivated to get an MBA degree. And, if you would not be motivated to learn and get a degree, then you would obviously not be here. You would probably go out and, go hang out somewhere, go to the beach today. It's winter almost, so people don't go to the beach, but you know what I mean. So you've made a right choice to use your time wisely and to use it for learning. And obviously you have a motivation and reasons to do that. And so the same thing here with the workplace. So in addition to goals, the sort of job parameters, the job dimensions and traits, can be discussed and cleared, defined during the performance appraisal, where the scope of your work, where does it fit in the workflow of other people's jobs and that type of a thing. And then, of course, behaviors and competencies. What are the specific behaviors and what are the specific competencies? And by the way, behaviors and competencies are kind of two different things. And sometimes it's difficult to determine what the actual behaviors are. I've with many times teaching human resource management, when we talked about this, and sometimes there's been an assignment for students to identify certain behaviors, and many times people, they talk about, positive personality or attitude or something like that. Well, attitude is not a behavior, it's an attitude. So why is this important that we identify behaviors? Well, it's because behaviors are those observable types of performance manifestations, if you will. And so if there's any legal issues, and we'll talk about this, in a bit, you have to be able to specifically focus on performance, that you don't, behavior, because you can't assess somebody's attitude. You can only assess their specific work-related performance. And if you can narrow it down to performance, there could be some legal problems. Ball Corporation is a company that provides metal packaging and to customers like food processors and paint manufacturers and so forth. So like a paint can, they built those, they manufacture those paint cans. So they instituted this improvement process for setting goals and ensuring that the plant's employees' behaviors were in sync with the organization's goals. And so they started this new program. It began by training plant leaders on how to improve performance and how to set and communicate daily performance goals, and then they in turn communicate and track daily goal attainment by distributing team scorecards and plans work teams, to the plans work teams. And then all the plan employees, they also receive special coaching and training, because that's important. You can't reach the goals if you don't get training. And so they, according to the management of the company, within 12 months, they increased production by 84 million cans, reduced customer complaints by 50%, and obtained a return of investment of more than 3 million. So it's just an example of how good goal setting and how if you do performance appraisal well and you set goals well. Sorry, I have dog hair flying in the air. I have, as you probably can see, sometimes in the background, I have 2 Siberian Huskies and they shed a lot, so I have dog hair flying around. So if I'm waving like that, that's not because I'm, seeing something. Well, I am seeing dog hair, but so anyway. So how to set effective goals? There's an acronym called SMART goals that is a good way of remembering it. S stands for specific, M stands for measurable, A stands for attainable, and R stands for realistic, and T stands for time bound. So you have to make sure that the goals are specific and that you have a way of measuring them. They have to be challenging but doable. And then you also want to make sure that you encourage participation, because people don't accomplish goals if they are not involved and engaged in the process. So the way to demonstrate SMART goals. So let's just say that I say that my goal is to be happy. Is that a SMART goal?
It's a very smart goal.
Is that a SMART goal? Yes? No?
I mean, according
Anybody?
to the definition you just mentioned, it is not. But
Yeah,
I think
what do you think? Do you think that it is a SMART goal or good goal? Is that something that would fit the definition of SMR,
that
the
it doesn't
SMART
fit.
acronym?
It doesn't fit the definition, but it's very important to be happy. That's why. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is that it does not, if I hear you correctly. So yeah, I mean, to say I'm happy, the problem with it is that what's happy to me, what's happy to somebody else is completely different. It's abstract. So is it specific? No. Smart is, happy is not specific. It's very, very difficult to define what smart is. What happy is according to the SMART acronym. Is it measurable? Well, is it really measurable? Go ahead. There's somebody has a hand up. Mohammed.
Yes, Professor. But sometimes we have some qualitative goals.
Yes.
So we can specific. I will rephrase it as a qualitative. I need to increase my joy during this year to whatever. So it's qualitative goals to change it to qualitative.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And that's exactly where I was getting with this, is that, in order for you to measure something like I want to be happy as a goal, you have to somehow be able to specify that into some, quantitative measurements, or something like joy or job satisfaction, or some type of things that you can kind of put some sort of a number to, or some sort of a assessment to, that you can measure it somehow. And so what I'm saying, that I'm not saying that is a bad thing to want to be happy. What I'm saying is that the statement I want to be happy could not be defined as being a SMART goal without defining what happiness means. And so that's the kind of point of it, is that it has to be specific, has to be measurable, has to be attainable. And abstract term like happiness, it's very difficult to define and even tell where people attain it, because what happens with happiness is that the very minute that you feel like you're happy, now you want something else, and now you think that the goal moves, because it's so abstract. And sometimes people don't even know when they're happy. It's silly, but that's true. People don't embrace and appreciate time, today, right now. They always want something more in the future. So in that way, they never sometimes reach happiness. So again, this is really not about the happiness as a term. It's more about demonstrating and how something has to be defined to be a SMART goal. And sometimes performance is one of those things that people say that go ahead and perform well. Well, what does that mean? And if you can define it, then you can set a goal for it. True story. I once had a supervisor who told us that we all had to be better than average. We all had to exceed. We had to, exceed the expectation. And we had to all be performing higher than average. Well, think about it. If we all perform higher than average, doesn't that higher than average then become the new average? And so therefore, expecting everybody as a group to perform higher than average, you can't, because it moves the needle. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Yes, regarding what you have said just now, Professor, in the appraisal, to appraise the teamwork is not measurable. So we
Yes.
are setting a criteria for each score.
Mhm.
Okay, if you do 1, 2, 3, 4, you get score 1. If you do 1, 2, 3, 4, you do score 2, whatever.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
is it the same? Are you saying now?
Yes, that a goal, in order for a goal to be a good goal, is you have to be able to, measure it 1, 2, 3, 4. Some way you have to be able to say, I'm at 1 right now, and my goal is to be at 4 or 5 or whatever, or 10. So somehow you have to be able to measure the performance in order for it to be measurable goal. And you can't make statements like everybody has to be above average, because then the above average becomes the new average. In other words, that's not a good way of defining where you want people to be. What you need to be able to do is to articulate in specific work-related behavioral terms what good performance looks like and what that goal should be. And of course, numerically, you can set a goal in salespeople. You can set a sales quota. With manufacturing, you can set quantitative goals. Lack of quality errors. You can set a standards of production, how many units have to be produced, those types of things. In customer service, you can say, I want you to decrease customer complaints by 50%. And so, anything that you want to set work-related goal, you want it to be specific like that there is a number that you can put to it. And if you think about it, assessment in the classroom, reason that we do assessment of learning, and we have quizzes and exams and papers, which I understand students are not fond of. It's not something that people look forward to doing, but that's part of education, is because we also have to put numbers on your learning to assess your level of learning, so that you can then set goals for yourself, for the next class or the next assignment, and saying, now I want to improve my performance. I just had this discussion with my son yesterday. He's doing quite well in school, and I'm really happy for him right now. But he wasn't always that way, and so he had set goals for himself, and he had to increase his goals and the way he knows is, of course, the grades in a report card. And so that's what report cards are, of course, kind of used for. That makes sense. So okay. Who should do the appraising? Sometimes appraisals are done in peer appraisal kind of a way. So what that means is that, and by the way, social media can be used for that. There are different tools, technological tools that can be used. Everybody in the workplace can be part of appraising somebody. They can even use sort of virtual games to kind of make appraisal kind of a more fun. Now, I gotta tell you, I never seen a virtual game being used myself. I never worked in an exciting enough workplace, I guess, where it would be used, but I can visualize how, it could be done. Technically, peer appraisal is called 360. 360 appraisal method is when and it's, number 5, 360-degree feedback is sort of the formal, and reason they call it 360 is because it's everything around you. So you're asking the supervisors, you're asking customers, you're asking peers to contribute to the appraisal. Obviously, it's time consuming and difficult to do appraisals that way. So in many cases, you kind of don't want to do it for all positions because it would be very confusing and time, consuming. But if you have key positions or managerial positions that are really, really critical, you may want to go to that length or that extreme. Rating committees, that can be done. You have a panel and committee that does the rating so that you don't just have one person, because one person can be biased. And so that could be one way of doing it. You could do self-ratings, like I mentioned earlier, which is very commonly done. You could do appraisal just by subordinates. Again, in a more team-oriented environment, that could be a way to do it. So, and of course, most traditionally, appraisals are done by the supervisor. But my point is that it doesn't have to be just the supervisor, and there would be, you can make a case that it should not be just the supervisor, because giving one person that much power to assess group of people would be leaving a lot of room for discrimination, biases, intentional or unintentional. And so there are many different ways that you can, when you have this employee appraisal form, you can come up with many different ways to, we talked about a minute ago, how do you turn something measurable? How do you, give it a number? Well, you give it a number by using graphic rating scale. It's really the simplest and most popular method for appraising performance. So there's several different varieties of graphic rating scale. You can really, it's list a number of traits and range of performance for each. So it can be 1, 2, 3, 5. 5 meaning, really good performance. 1 means, very bad performance type of a thing. It could be 10 scale. It could be a lot of different scales could be described. So, there's, it could be used by achieving specific goals, like we just talked about, profit, cost, efficiency, etc. Alternative ranking involves ranking, or alternation ranking, involves ranking employees from best to worst in a particular trade, which is not very popular, and it's kind of unfair too, because it shouldn't be about others, but there are some workplaces where it's done that way. Ford Corporation back in the day did, they did forced distribution and they did ranking. So it turned out to be very unfair, and they had to revamp the entire program because, comparing to others is not necessarily, good. It creates competition within team and destroys the teamwork. Paired comparison, where you pair employees and you compare employees, in pairs, and each trade, which one is a better employee of the pair. Forced distribution, it's kind of like if you ever taken a college course or high school course or whatever, where, your grades have been curved, where you force everybody's, you have 25% of high scores, you have 50% in the middle and 25% failures. So you force everybody in a normal curve, and statistically, you force the distribution. In that way, there's always going to be somebody who's going to fail, no matter how well they performed. And so you can obviously realize that that's not always fair either, but there are scenarios where it makes sense to do it that way. And then there's the critical incident method that involves keeping kind of record of uncommonly good or undesirable examples of what employees' work-related behaviors are, and reviewing it with the employee at predetermined times. So that's an other way of going about it. So there are narrative forms that can be used when whoever is doing the appraisal is written as a narrative. It's a good way of doing it if the supervisor is a good writer. It's good because you are able to elaborate. It becomes more qualitative than quantitative, and you are able to really kind of elaborate on things in a narrative. The problem is not all supervisors are good writers and able to really communicate in a written form that well. So that can become an issue. And also it can become time consuming to do write narratives of many employees. So then there's a behaviorally anchored scale. They call it BARS. It's an appraisal method that really aims at combining the benefits of narrative critical incidents and quantified ratings. So it's anchoring certain behaviors. So because sometimes when you have something sort of a 5-point scale or 10-point scale, it becomes really difficult to sort of determine exactly what, say, 7 would be in a 10-point scale, or what would 4 be. And so sometimes you create these anchored behaviors in each of those scales to give an example of what would 4 be, what would 7 be, what would 6 be. So you give assistance to the manager by giving kind of a rubric, and you behaviorally anchor those numbers to examples of critical incidences where because the reality is that if you just have numbers and you're asking somebody to rate something, people rate things differently. They have a different idea what 7 or 8 would look like. And by behaviorally anchoring it, you kind of make sure that they are consistent. Then there is MBO, management by objectives. It's a multi-step, company-wide goal setting and appraisal program. It requires managers to set specific, measurable. We just talked about SMART goals. They had to be organizationally relevant, and then periodically discuss their employees' progress towards those goals. If MBO is done well, it can be a very, very, very effective system. But the problem is that it's not always done well, and it requires a lot of paperwork, lots of documentation to list the goals and to map the goals and to link them to organizational goals. So MBO system is problematic from that perspective, and it has to be an entire management philosophy for it to be effective. Also, there's a problem with only staring at objectives, because if you only stare at objectives, you are not paying attention to the process. And sometimes it's the process that defines what the outcomes are, and not just staring at the objectives. Sometimes people can take shortcuts and get to those objectives in unethical ways. So sometimes you have to make sure that you focus on the right way of doing it and not just the right outcome, if that makes sense. So back in personnel management days, obviously all of this was done using paper forms, and many organizations still do this by using forms. They are also installed software, and they are cloud-based system. A lot of their HRIS systems, human resources information systems, they are cloud-based these days, and they have a mechanism and system of tracking performance. And so employee can go with their password, they can go in and they can do their assessment, manager can do their assessment, and they all just put their input in the same system. Obviously, computerization expedites the appraisal, makes it faster for everybody to get through. It also confuses it sometimes, because maybe, I mean, you can maybe tell me if anybody has had experiences with these because I'm sure everybody here has been appraised at the workplace somehow. And, I mean, at least my experience have been that sometimes it takes a little while to figure out how the computer system works and what to do and what to feel. It's not always easy to navigate the computerized systems. And, if it's done well, it's easy to just like see right away where you put your own feedback and your own assessment, even as a manager, how to figure it out. But sometimes these systems are not self-explanatory. Does anybody want to share an appraisal? I mean, you don't have to share whether you're well appraised or poorly appraised, but can anybody share an experience about how you felt about appraisal system? Go ahead, Mohammed.
So in the company I work for, they have a computerized like monthly appraisal system with the step manager, and this one is like straightforward because it's a multiple choice. You
Okay.
will check with your manager, he will give you the rating right away, and there is like one portion for any comments.
Yeah.
And you have the right to push back or to discuss or to give more data for your manager to change the appraisal. And
Yeah.
there is a quarterly appraisal with the senior management. So every manager will get his team appraisals, discuss it with his senior management quarterly. And then there is like one appraisal for the final appraisal for the year. And it's all computer based.
Yeah. Sounds interesting. Do you remember the name of that system? The software that is used or the vendor? Because there are companies
So
like
it's
PeopleSoft or
it's internal software. So the project itself is called like Thrive to development. Every manager will have his direct reports listed below him, and he has to finish or finalize this appraisal before the last day of the month. This will automatically go to the HR system,
Yeah.
so they can use it in the quarterly appraisals.
Good. Yeah, interesting. Very good example. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? So other interesting information technology tool that can be used is these EPM systems, electronic performance monitoring, computer network technology that allows managers to monitor their employees' computers. How would you feel about that? Do you feel comfortable if you know that your manager is observing what you're doing in a computer? Does that seem comfortable? Do you think that's a violation of privacy? Well, I can tell you that it's not a. Go ahead.
Not a violation. Yeah, sorry, Professor. I think it's not a violation of the privacy because you already agreed on this when you get your laptop.
Yes.
And you can go further because what I heard last month that
Yes.
even the internal chat applications employees are using in the inside the company, their managers have access to review the chat for 3 months.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a violation of privacy at all because by accepting the employment and accepting the equipment that the employer provides to you, and they provide you email address and all of that, the employer has full rights to monitor and observe your work performance using the equipment and technology that they have provided to you. They own that system. So, I mean, any emails that you write with your company's email address, your company does have a right to those emails. Now, they don't have a right to anything you are sending with your personal email address and any personal equipment, but that's where things get a little tricky sometimes. If you use your work computer for anything personal, then it could be a gray area. Also, how many of us use our personal cell phone for work related? So do they have a right to monitor your use of your personal cell phone. So there are some conflict issues and complicated topics around this, and many times people don't feel comfortable being observed. But many times it's actually for the employee's safety as well, because if something happens, they can also, something happens to them, there's a harassment incident or attack of some kind. Well, if it's monitored, well, like not so much looking at your computer, but in cameras or something like that, it can also help the employee to make their case. So, but it's not uncommon for employers to monitor certain behaviors, because so many of our jobs these days are computer based. There is really no way of tracking performance in people's cubicles without accessing the computer. So I mean, it makes sense when you kind of think about it. Conversation days, is one-on-ones are very, very common. You have one-on-one meeting with your supervisor once a week, once a month, once every 2 weeks, whatever rotation makes sense. And that's your opportunity to discuss your performance. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but there's a difference between performance appraisals and performance management. Performance management is the ongoing assessment of performance and not just waiting for that one time, once a year or twice a year. So these conversation days are very, very important. And in reality, you can use multiple methods. Many appraisals are using multiple different methods in the same way. Like if I give you a quiz, I could use multiple choice or essay questions or whatever. In the same way you can combine these methods, and scales and different, to kind of get a balanced view. And many times they are. You could have a behaviorally anchored scale, bars, and then you would have a narrative where you score somebody, and then you write in comments a narrative. So that's a combination of two different methods. And so and by the way, one method of performance appraisal would be not to do performance appraisal at all. And that sounds radical, but there's a lots of support to that notion. That if you do effective, good quality performance management by having these conversation days or regularly scheduled one-on-ones, and you have discussion about your goals and your performance weekly in that way, that there's no need to have your performance appraisal once a year, because if your one-on-ones are documented, and they are kept in a systematic way, they can serve as that annual kind of appraisal, just a collection of that sort of a documentation. Now, to get managers to document their one-on-one discussions may be difficult, but the reason why you could potentially want to not have a performance appraisal is that it's an uncomfortable situation for everybody. Managers don't like performance appraisals. People don't want to be appraised, and there's a lot of opportunity for conflict. And we'll talk after the break, how do you avoid that? But there's a lot of opportunity for conflict. And let me just tell you, I do leadership executive coaching in addition to teaching, and I recently and still have a client, an executive who is really struggling with the performance appraisals. This is a gentleman who is very organized, very efficient in planning, and very exact, and kind of a perfectionist. And he does not feel like his employees are quite measuring up to his expectations. And he approaches these performance appraisals kind of like the judgment day, that he has to give the evidence that somebody's behaving or performing poorly, and his employees are not welcoming it. And it's not that he's not right. His observations and his evidence that he's collected is accurate, and so he's doing a accurate performance appraisal, but it's the way that he delivers them that offends his employees, and it backlashes because it's not a, it doesn't become a motivating, inspiring, developmentally supportive kind of event, but instead it becomes a conflict where people escalate and, they even go to HR to complain or whatever. And so we have been working during our coaching sessions on that to try to get him to understand that it isn't just a transactional situation, that it's a transformative, where it's an opportunity for you to support your employee and help them to develop. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Sorry, because the chat box is not working, so I couldn't write my comment. And so in the example I shared like 5 minutes ago, there is one important part where you can accept or refuse the final conclusion of the appraisal, the one-to-one.
Yes.
And then you can work with your manager to fix that. So if you don't agree with the final conclusion that you're like for the final evaluation that your manager gave you at the end of the evaluation, you have the right to refuse or don't accept this final appraisal and work with your manager in the next one.
Yes, and that's exactly what should happen. Yes, that's exactly what should happen. If you don't agree with it, manager has to recognize that if there's a disagreement, you have to work to resolve that, because it's not good to leave this unresolved. And so you really have to then kind of get sort of in a negotiation. And some employees are more difficult than others. It's not like you are bargaining of the score, but if you have to help the employee to accept it, if it's true assessment. And that's where the skill of a manager comes in. And I have time to time, I have changed my rating, and if the employee comes back with the evidence of contrary, or they make a good case, and I think it's a very, very good thing for manager to say, look, thank you, I wasn't aware, you brought some information, that helped me to correct my evaluation. And so you should always leave room for that, because that demonstrates that you are really supportive. That is not a punishment. It's really an attempt to get into correct evaluation, and it's all two-way street. It should be. So, many organizations, they customize appraisals, customize them to come up with the creative different ways. So what we listed today aren't the only possibilities. They can be, Mohammed described one system that sounded like a little bit of variation, kind of more a multiple choice scenario. And so they can be variations of any of these. Companies don't have to follow a textbook and say, this is how we have to do it because HR textbook tells us that we have to do it that way. They have a right to come up with any system that they please and create their own. And we have a right to go for a break. So it is 10:58 Central Standard Time in US. And so it should be at top of the hour wherever you are at, 2 minutes before the top of the hour. So let's come back 15 after, whatever hour it is, where you at, okay? And I'll leave this on so that we don't have to hop in and out. Okay, everybody, let's get started again. I hope you had a good coffee break. So, yeah, some of the problems with these appraisals are, of course, radar errors. So what can cause radar errors? Well, first of all, unclear standards. We talked about that already. You know, lack of smart goals, lack of good job description, lack of good parameters. And so that can be confusing. And that's actually fairly common. There are many situations where the supervisor doesn't really know what they are assessing. Sometimes it can be because of turnover, because both in employee side or supervisory ranks, it's hard when you are coming in as a new supervisor and you have to pick up and understand, all the performance of everybody and their jobs, and then you don't have that history with them. But also because jobs are increasingly complex. And so even if you have a really good supervisor, and it's not so much the supervisor's fault, but I mean, if you are supervising highly technical employees, group of engineers, so computer programmers, something that is fairly detailed and complex, you cannot be expected to know all of your employees' jobs that well. I mean, there are supervisors who cannot be experts in everything. So that becomes difficult as well. Then there's a halo effect, where it also called stigma effect. So halo effect is that, when an employee does one thing good, and that one thing is sort of um, becomes well known, or is for whatever reason highlights the performance, then that one good deed, one good performance is used to paint their entire performance appraisal. In other words, one good makes the person good for entire year. Same thing with stigma effect, the opposite. One bad deed can ruin the performance appraisal. So you take that one bad example of behavior and you generalize that to everything. So halo effect, stigma effect can be a difficult thing. Central tendency is when an supervisor rates everybody more or less the same. Why would they do that? Well, sometimes it's because they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. They don't want to create conflict. They are afraid of conflict. They don't know how to kind of negotiate it well. And they are worried about employees talking to each other. And so they just sort of kind of rate everybody even Steven, which is really just a poor performance evaluation when, there's really no standard. It's just like everybody's just get it over with. Let's give everybody, it's almost the same score. So central tendency, and sometimes central tendency is, something unconscious. It's not intentional at all. Sometimes managers kind of do that just because they want to be part of the team, and they just kind of maybe see it that way. Leniency or strictness. There are many psychological factors of why a supervisor could be extra lenient or extra strict, depending on, their experiences, their background, their own history. So, for example, if, when you think about, I can give you an example of when I was in military in Finland, we have a mandatory military service, and I was in Finnish Army Special Forces, and boot camp was it was pretty hard. And, it was basically like boot camp is one of those things that, who the officers and the surgeons that were running the boot camp, they had got a rough boot camp themselves, so they sort of returned the favor to us. So it's kind of the same thing with supervisors, managers in organizations. If they have been gotten a strict, harsh performance review from their supervisors currently or in the past, they may, act in a similar way and be extra strict themselves or lenient. A lenient would be, again, because they want to be friends with the employees, so you don't want to really cause conflict or whatever. And so there are a lot of reasons for both extra leniency or extra strictness. And of course, it's all of these can really cause havoc and really can ruin the entire performance appraisal, because it can really, really just, cause wrong results, and in the end, is bad for everybody and the company. I already mentioned the recency effects. Supervisors tend to rate what they remember, and they don't remember events more than 3 months behind. And so it's really your 3 months before the appraisal that really has been, is being evaluated, and not necessarily, before that. And that's why it's important to have documentation for all the one-on-ones and all the meetings throughout, and then for the supervisor to go back to it and kind of evaluate it, or to have some sort of a tracking system, some sort of quality management systems, that's something that you can pull results for the entire year and then take an average, and so that you don't just focus on what you can remember in the past. We kind of talked about this already in terms of job interviews, but unfortunately, there are certain demographic traits, age, race, gender, and so on, that do affect ratings. And they are personalities, liking, not liking somebody, people that we have bad relationships with, that impact ratings. And so the fact of the matter is that raters are humans, and sometimes these prejudices and biases are completely unconscious. And if you don't particularly like the person, supervisors cannot like everybody. Liking should have nothing to do with observed behavior and the performance appraisal, but it does. And by the way, there's been a lot of studies on this. Attractiveness can actually be a problem. So if a person is particularly attractive, woman or man, really good looking people, very, attractive people actually get rated harsher than people who are kind of average. And then on the other side, people who are very unattractive, we talked about it, like if somebody has a scar in their face, it's not pretty to look at. Somebody has burn marks or something like that. Those should have nothing to do with anything, but in reality, people, associate those things with certain things, and it's can actually hurt the appraisal. So the best way to avoid these biases is, of course, to do multiple appraisal ratings where you have multiple people rating the same person, whether you do the 360 or a peer appraisal, subordinate appraisal, or a panel. It's the best way is to involve more than just one person. So there's a checklist, and this is kind of a long checklist, so let's just kind of go through one-on-one. These in a book, you can see that in figure 910. So best practices for administering fair performance appraisal. We talked about this already. Base your performance review on duties and standards from the job analysis. If the job analysis is well performed, then you have a clear job description And you also have clear job specifications, which are the competencies and skills required to do the job well. And so you've used those in your selection process, in interviews and testing and everything that you've done to select the employee. You use those in your training to make sure that the employee is well trained for the job. Now you're using the same list of tasks and skills and KSAs, skills, knowledge, skills, and attitudes, so you are or abilities, knowledge, skills, and abilities, and you use the same observable, well-written criteria for your job appraisal. I always mentioned this as well before, that you try to base your performance review on observable job behaviors and objective performance data. Anything that you can measure and quantify, it's going to be legally more defendable. And it has to be something that you can observe and that you can specifically say, I observed you doing this and this and this and this. And if you have evidence of that, like you monitored somebody's performance on a computer, it's easier to convince somebody, an employee, to accept it when you can show and say, look, when they feel like you are being completely objective and that you are just doing your job, trying to go in after them or anything like that. So it has to be objective performance data. Make it clear ahead of the time, way before the performance appraisal, what your performance expectations are. This is one of the problems with the client of mine that I mentioned, is that he has very high expectations, but he's not good in communicating them. And so the performance appraisal becomes a surprise. And it should never, ever, ever be a surprise. When you schedule performance appraisal, it should never be something that employee has no idea what kind of rating they're going to get, or no idea what's going to be discussed in a performance appraisal, and it becomes complete surprise. It should never be a surprise. In a best scenario, the discussions about performance would be ongoing, and the employee would know way before, and they would know what to anticipate, and it would be merely just discussing it and coming in terms, but the actual level of performance would not become a surprise. And of course, goes without saying that everybody should be appraised using the same standard. And so, everybody should be appraised fairly. And so using the standardized performance review procedure for all employees, that everybody is, rated the same, what is it, bars, anchor scale, narrative, whatever it is, same process, same system, same standard for everybody. So you also want to make sure that whoever reviews the conduct has frequent opportunities to observe the employee's behavior. It's very, very difficult to appraise somebody if you have not been close enough to. And I've had these situations in the past when I was a provost of a university, chief academic officer. There were quite a few subordinates that I had, and they would be somebody in a financial aid or registrar's office or admissions that I would not maybe visit daily, because my background is mostly in the academic side. So I would interact with faculty more than with the student services, just because that's not my background. And so I had to be extra careful to make sure that I did take daily visits there and understood the student services jobs too, in the same way than faculty jobs. Just because I was more familiar with the faculty jobs didn't mean that the other people didn't deserve to be reviewed in the same way. So I had to make sure that I took the opportunity to observe their behavior and their performance as often as possible. Otherwise, I would not be in a position of rating them. And so, either use multiple raters or have the rater supervisor evaluate the appraisal results. So you always want to have not just one eye on it. And typically, most commonly, it's done in a way that the supervisor of the supervisor, that is conducting the ratings or the appraisal kind of approves it and kind of goes through it and, looks for, make sure that everything is according to the same standard and everything is objective. So then the ability to conduct fair performance appraisals becomes part of the performance appraisal of the supervisor. And that way it's kept in check. Now, that's not the best way to do it, but that's the most common way of doing it. Obviously, multiple raters, 360 would be even better. But then again, in 360, it can be biased too, because, your coworkers would have many, many reasons to either support you or not support you. And if you ask them to evaluate you, there could be other dynamics that play in the picture that are not just based in, the job performance. So it gets complicated. Include an appeals mechanism. We talked about it. Mohammed mentioned that as well. There has to be an way to disagree. If you disagree with it, there has to be a way that you can. It cannot be that the appraisal is, the final judgment. There has to be a fair process of appeals, and if somebody really wants to dispute it, there has to be an opportunity for them to bring forth new evidence and to change their appraisal, and it has to be fairness in the process. Obviously, everything has to be documented and reviewed. So after the appraisals are done, HR should review and make sure that the process works and the results are well received, and so forth and so on. I've been in organizations that have been using the same forms and same process for really, really long time, and never just bothered to improve the process. And perhaps the process is not working anymore, and nobody's wanting to take action to change the process. So, but then again, if you change the process every year, then you don't have any comparison points anymore. Because every time you change the process, now you are comparing apples and oranges if you compare to the previous year. So needless to say, this can get very, very complicated. And we are going into this in a kind of a detail, because it's an important area of human resource management. It's an important activity, but also because, and this goes to, earlier when we had a discussion of how do you learn this, how important it is to read the book, is because while all of this seems very familiar to you, everybody has gone through it, everybody has been appraised or appraised somebody, it seems like it's common sense. But there's actually a lot that goes into this. And when you start digging deeper and looking at this, it's a lot less common sense and it's a lot more complicated than it appears. So conducting truly good quality appraisals really takes a lot of effort and concentration, and it's not something that is just trivial. Obviously, you need to discuss the appraisal results with the employee. Obviously, I say obviously, but unfortunately, sometimes that discussion does not take place. I've been in situations where my supervisor had handed me my performance appraisal, barely given me an opportunity to read it, and said, sign it, and then let's move on and let's talk about something else. Now, that's a sloppy and terrible way of doing it, but it does happen. And I'm sure you all have experiences of similar. We talked about this already. Let the employees know ahead of time that you are doing and conducting the interviews. It has to be scheduled ahead of time. You cannot pop in somebody's office and say, hey, we're going to do performance appraisal right now. Goes without saying. Let the employee provide input. Emphasized and talked about this many, many times, how important that is. Indicate what the employee needs to do to improve. Again, specific behaviors, set specific SMART goals, specific behaviors. This is what you need to do in order to improve, and provide support. If it requires training, then provide the training. And so it could not be arbitrary. It should not be arbitrary or something that is a guessing game. What can I do to improve this? It has to be, again, objective and realistic. Train the supervisors who will be doing the appraisal. Make sure that they understand what the procedure is. make sure that they understand the biases. In other words, everything that I went through here today, you should go through with your supervisors before they do the appraisal. You should talk about leniency and strictness. You could talk about central tendencies. You could talk about stigma and halo effect, and make sure that they know and have techniques, how to deal with those, and that they can reflect on their own biases and their own cultural or personality, factors, and contemplate on how they can impact. So that when you go to a performance review, I mean, if you know that you don't particularly like somebody for whatever reason, I mean, let's be honest about it. We don't like everybody. And there's nothing wrong with not liking somebody. I mean, we cannot like, what is wrong about it is to penalize that person because you don't like them for whatever reason. It's, basically keep it to yourself and treat them fairly, even if you don't particularly like them. In the same way, if you really, really like somebody, you can easily give them a better review than they deserve. So it shouldn't be about liking, but the reality is that these things do play into, we're all humans. And, that's what happens. So appraising performance are really the biggest reason why there are lawsuits are really have to do with performance. So if there are layoffs, promotions, discharges, merit pay, any type of situations like that, if the person feels like they're unfairly treated, they're going to take up the performance appraisal, and they're going to make sure that it holds in court. So there are many things that you want to make sure that you do in order to make sure that your appraisals are legally defensible. Of course, you gotta base the duties and criteria you appraise on the job analysis. That's the best way of making sure. I mentioned that several times. You communicate performance standards to employees in writing, not just something that you told them you have to do it this way. Make sure that you can prove that you have communicated them in writing. Preferably they've signed it, whatever. So when you give them the job description, make sure they sign that they received the job description and that they understood it. Use a single overall rating performance is not unacceptable to the course. If you're just giving one number and say, okay, we really no details or no other like detailed multiple observations, say, you are 10 and you are 9, you are 8, whatever, one number, that's too vague. That's not acceptable. So courts, they require combining several separate ratings for each performance dimension, quality, quantity, so on. So there has to be a formal weighting system, that yields and comes up with the summary score. So you have to be able to explain how do you arrive to that summary score. One appraisal should never have absolute authority to determine any sort of personnel action, and always document all information. In a court, if you go to court about it, it would be very, very hard to prove anything if you haven't documented it. And train supervisors. You should have formal radar training, but at least if you can, then at least provide written instructions. And so then you can, in court, you can prove that you handed those instructions to your supervisors so that they can appraise people appropriately. So the appraisal interview is that meeting that you have with the supervisor and subordinate that reviews, the appraisal and makes plans for remedying deficiencies and reinforcing strengths, etc. So that's the interview. And let's just talk about that a little bit, like how that should happen. Preparation. Both supervisor and the employee should come prepared. It's really, really bad when, you're sitting out there and both of them are like, okay, let's look at it, this, and trying to read the document same time, and they're trying to have the, discussion. I like to give the performance review documents to the employee beforehand so that they can read it, and then we have an interview and discussion about it when they have an opportunity already to read the feedback. Now, some supervisors may want to do it differently. But no matter how you do it, everybody should come prepared. Planning, you really want to beforehand think it through, how the interview, how the discussion is going to take place. What steps are you going to take? How you're going to measure success? And, when everything, it should be predefined when everything is completed. So if you're going to send something to the employee in advance and say, do your self-appraisal, you should give them the due date, of when they have to perform it. And if in a performance interview, you come up with certain goals or milestones or something that they have to, correct their performance, then you give them a date that they have to complete that and make sure that they know, how you're going to come back and evaluate it and how you're going to determine that was done. And, provide coaching, not just saying, you are not performing well, but, give them your support and coach them so that they can be better. So use that as an opportunity to also coach. Again, objective data, don't get personal, provide encouragement and reach an agreement. So that's the hard part, and talked about this already. You got to reach an agreement, because if you don't reach an agreement, then the appraisal really is incomplete, although signatures may be forced on a piece of paper because employees say, well, you have to sign this to, at least to recognize and acknowledge that this was shared with you. But really, they should only sign it if they agree with it. And in a good, fair organization, that's the way it is. You only sign your performance appraisal once you have reached the point that you actually agree with it. Now, liking the outcome or liking the observation and agreeing with it are two different things. You can still be in a situation where you didn't quite like the results, but you are finally agreeing with it. Mohammed, go ahead.
Professor, signing in our company, signing the appraisal does not mean you agree. Signing the appraisal means that you already done the appraisal with your boss. If you disagree, you can appeal. But signing the appraisal that it was done face to face with you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I understand. And like I said, many organizations, that's how they perceive it. But really, when you think about it in a proper way of doing it, signing means agreement, because signing means, like when you sign a contract, when you sign an agreement in a court of law, signing means you agreed. So, yeah, it obviously exactly what you're saying is true, that the organizations say, well, signing means that you acknowledge that this was shared with you and that you had that interview. You don't have to share with it. I mean, you don't have to agree with it. But the reality is that for the appraisal process to really be completed and for it to really be effective, you have to reach an agreement. And to me, it's important that the signatures happen only when agreement is reached. Because it's only that way that you know that you are really done with it, and it's productive and motivating, or I mean, at least process is followed, and you know that the employee is going to take action to correct something. If they didn't agree with it, they're probably not going to take corrective action. And if you force them to sign it, people who did not witness the appraisal interview in HR, they acknowledge, when there's a signature in their mind, that's an agreed done deal. So what happens when somebody gets defensive? And this happens, often, and it's a difficult thing for managers to handle. Well, recognize their behavior, acknowledge that they are being defensive, and even acknowledge that it's, in some cases, understandable. Never attack on defenses. Never attack somebody and saying, you should not get defensive. Look, that just shows that you are guilty, kind of a thing. Never attack that. You acknowledge and say, appears that you are, feeling a little defensive right now. Your behavior indicates that you are a little bit defensive right now, and it's okay. It's understandable that sometimes people behave that way when they get feedback that they don't necessarily like, but we can discuss this and we can, clarify this. But you don't necessarily want to do it right there and then. If somebody escalates and they get upset, maybe that's not the right time and place to be doing that. So you postpone the action and say, let's just calm down and talk about it when you've had time to reflect, and maybe we can reach some sort of agreement here. Give them an opportunity to bring, evidence, if they feel like they are wrongfully appraised. But you also have to recognize limitations and say, look, no matter how much I would like to change the rating over here, I can't change the rating because it's based on observed, objective performance evidence, and we have to all comply with the process. So you have to kind of recognize limitations there, and the employee has to ultimately understand that they can stamp their foot all they want, and it's normal to feel that way. They have to, in the end, they have to behave professionally. So if you have to
Professor,
criticize
I have another question. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Last year, our company, our HR, obligate us to use the bell-shaped in HR for the appraisal.
Yeah.
For the percentages.
Yes.
Excellent
Forced
performance
distribution.
to be. Yes.
Mhm.
So what should I do if I have the team is above average?
It's I don't think personally that forced distribution is defendable, but sometimes organizations do use it. And what should you do? What I would do is that I would just like to help or talk to my supervisor to try to convince them to put it in perspective. And to remind them that this is a forced distribution, and even if I didn't get the score that I would otherwise get, because see, in some situations forced distribution helps people, in some situations it hurts them. So it depends in which side you are. And of course the problem is that the people who benefit from it never complain, and it's only people who hurt from it, because their score is negatively impacted, they're the ones to complain. So if the organization foresees that there's very little that you can do other than to try to get in an agreement about it, that it is forced, that, is take that into consideration and, put it in perspective. But I don't think it's defendable ultimately.
So a lot of people will get hurt and they will not agree with the appraisal.
If you don't agree, you don't agree. That's the thing, is that, you can't force somebody to agree. And the organization can force them to sign the piece of paper, but ultimately you have a right to disagree. And if it's a forced distribution, that puts you in a bad light because it's forced, because 25% in a forced distribution or whatever, you can put the parameters in any way you want to, but typically a bell-shaped curve, you have 25 tails in both end and 50 in the middle. And so somebody's gonna, get the best score, even if they were mediocre, and then the person who may have been just very close to that mediocre score almost the same, but because they were the lowest one, they're going to fail and they're going to be fired, essentially. They're going to in an unsatisfactory rating. So the forced distribution is going to force somebody to be the best and force somebody to be the lowest. It's going to take away that central tendency and force the curve. And if you are in the tail that hurts you, you have a right not to agree with it. And an objective person would say, look, you can't agree with it because I was still an average, but you're forcing this distribution and it hurts me. So do you have a right to disagree? Yes, you have a right to disagree. If your workplace is using forced distribution in the beginning with, this is just my opinion, so don't take this to your boss or anything like that. But my opinion is that they're not considering fairness in the first place, because it's not a fair way of assessing people, in my opinion, So they probably then are not going to be too interested on the fact that you disagree with it. They're going to say, disagree all you want, but this is our way of doing it, and that's all there is to it. And ultimately, all you can do in that situation is to take them to court. But is that going to cost you your job? Do you really want to take it to court? Depends how severely you are, penalized, or what the consequences are of that forced distribution. But it's not a fair way of doing it, in my opinion. When you do have to criticize people, sometimes it's difficult. And you have to make sure that no matter what the criticism is, help the person to maintain their dignity. Put the criticism in a way that the person can still feel whole. That is, you don't attack them as a person. You're saying, look, you're wonderful. And by the way, it's a good way to give feedback. It's kind of use a sandwich technique. You start with something polite and encouraging, then you give them the criticism, and then you end discussion with something positive and encouraging. It's called sandwich method. And so you sandwich the negative between two positives. And so you really do want to make sure that you're talking about specific behaviors, not attacking the person. You discuss in private. And by the way, even in private, you want to think about the situation and setup. If you have this big executive desk and you have this executive chair behind the desk, and then you have the employee sitting on the other side of the desk in a small bench, obviously from the get-go, you are in different footing. You're already, already demonstrating your power over them and not in an equal setting. So really, you want to do the performance appraisal in the setting when you're in a, basically around the table where both are in a similar footing and equal. It helps with the two-way discussion. You want it to be a private. You want it to be confidential. You want the criticism to be very constructive. Go ahead, Mohammed.
So they always say, don't attack people, attack the process and engage people.
I didn't quite hear what you said.
So the quote says, don't attack people. So the quote says, attack the process, engage people, instead of attacking people.
Yeah, equitable. I'm not sure. Again, I didn't hear you very, very clearly there, but yeah, I mean, absolutely, the process, should be, equitable in itself. So that's very, very important. So examples, if you are one way to keep things equitable, one way to, to help, for somebody to agree with it is that, you provide observable examples. You say, this and this date, this is what I, observed, and this is what happened. And, you don't make it a personal attack. You are just reporting, but you don't want to pile up the examples either in a way that it starts sounding like an attack. Person, this requires a lot of emotional intelligence to be doing this right. But you really want to do it tactfully. You give examples just enough to make a point and to, but you don't want to humiliate the person by piling up example after example after example if there is that much negative feedback to be given. And, if you give that feedback periodically in before the appraisal, then, like I said before, I mean, they know what's coming anyway. Be objective and free of personal bias, of course, without saying, but very difficult. And then, you agree on a plan. I said, even if you don't agree with everything that we said about you, ultimately you want to get to the point with that employee who doesn't agree that, at least you agree that, okay, this is the plan that you're gonna do going forward to improve things. Sometimes weak performance may require written warning. You have to use the progressive disciplinary method, verbal warning, written warning, first discussion, then verbal warning, written warning, etc. You can't just go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds and just fire a person without any warning. So, but if you get to the point that appraisal reaches to the point of written warning, it really serves the purpose of shaking your employee out of his or her bad habits, because written warning is like something that you want to avoid, and it's like it's a reality check and saying, okay, this is going to your personal record, and so you have to mostly people, if they haven't taken your verbal consultations and your subtle hints or your instructions or even verbal warning seriously, written warning they tend to take seriously because it goes in your file. So it's also written warning has to be there to defend your rating to your own boss and to the courts. So it's important again to put that in writing, because otherwise somebody will dispute that verbally it wasn't maybe mentioned. Now, when done positively and good, appraisals can be a really, really good tool to build engagement. And so this is sort of the positive side of it. Like we talked about how difficult it is to keep criticism and how difficult it is to receive the criticism, and how uncomfortable this can be to both, appraisal and the employee. But if this is done well, it can be an extremely positive thing. The performance appraisal can really, really get people on the same page, really help to see the big picture. And that's why it is important for employees to talk about the big picture, talk about the meaningfulness of the appraisal, how meaningful it is to have that back and forth discussion, be candid and objective. And remember that if you have to give some negative feedback, also remember to give a lot of positive. So and so tell person when they are doing a good job, and also if you have to give a negative, then then also make sure that you give them a tools to improve. So verbal warning, is there a verbal warning? If yes, how can it be documented? Well, I would document it. So I keep a performance file of all my employees, and so if I give them a verbal warning, I will write a note and put that into the performance file, my own file, not the HR file, where I document what was discussed during the verbal warning. So there is a journal input, if you will, if there's a notation of that verbal warning was given, but it's not an official written warning that actually goes to the personnel file. So yes, I mean, that's how I would treat a verbal warning. Again, don't unnecessarily emphasize the negatives. It's so easy for people to dwell in negativity and keep it going on and on and on. It's difficult to keep it in perspective and say, look, this may not have been, perfect way of handling it, and this was an example of a undesirable, performance behavior. But let's put this in a, perspective. Let's put it in a big picture. It's not the end of the world. We don't have to dwell on that as long as you know how to fix that particular thing. Let's focus on the positives. People always respond to carrot better than force. So always reward is better than force. If person has ideas about how they can improve their performance, listen to their ideas, get them engaged in a process, have a discussion about it, discuss it in a context of their career, and remind people that a lot of famous people, a lot of successful people had, challenges during their career. They stumbled, they made mistakes. We all make errors. That's normal. It doesn't mean that it's all gone. So again, help them to put it in a context of their career. Or if that job is something that they simply do not do well, maybe you want to discuss about it, that maybe this isn't, for you. Maybe this isn't really what you want to do in your career. And so maybe there are reasons why you're not doing well, because you're not really that motivated of doing it. Not every job is for everybody. So, and again, of course, the interviewee views the appraisal as fair. It is, and that's why I would go back to what we talked about earlier, just signing it and whatever. at the end of the day, if you have done appraisal well, the employee has to perceive it as a fair appraisal and the process as fair. If they don't, it's not going to work for you. It's going to be damaging and it's going to hurt your organization to do these appraisals. And in that case, you're better off not doing them at all because it's an unfair. It's going to just demonstrate that you are being unfair. So that's not positive for anybody. I already mentioned that there's a difference between performance appraisals and performance management. And so, like I just said, in reality, appraisals don't always go smoothly. In reality, sometimes it hurts the morale more than it helps, and it creates conflict. And so, how do you avoid the conflict? Well, sometimes you don't do the performance appraisal. There's a way of doing performance management without doing these overly important, serious performance, appraisals. There's a smoother way of doing it. And so you could build performance management into sort of continuous process of identifying, measuring, and developing performance in an ongoing kind of fashion that doesn't have these sort of peak appraisal kind of serious events that people have to prepare for. Now it's difficult to keep going that way, but there is a way of doing it, and very progressive, great performing organizations, they certainly do well in performance management. Then doing the appraisal is no big deal because it's being continuously discussed. I can tell you that I have that kind of management style. I mean, I visit with my employees daily if I can, and make sure that they know that I know how they are performing, and I have that discussion with them as often as possible, so that when it's time for performance appraisal, it's no big deal. It's just documenting what we already discussed. And so I try to make sure that I get to that point because I believe that it's important, and because I don't like difficult performance appraisal discussions any more than anybody. So I try to make sure that I have that. But I also try to manage up with my supervisors. Want to make sure that I have a discussion with them, even if they don't want to initiate that discussion. I want to periodically ask them and say, where do you think that I am? Do you think that I'm performing according to your expectations? Is there anything that you think I can improve on? As an employee, when you take that kind of productive approach, you're really defending yourself already for, your performance appraisal, because you're asking their support, you're asking for training if needed, you're putting it out there and say that you're willing to learn and that you're willing to, hear feedback. And that just creates that situation for ongoing performance management where you can take corrective action before it's too late. And so that's really the goal of it. Why would you wait till the end of the year to give somebody feedback? Give them feedback right away. Start acting, correcting that behavior right away, without waiting for that once in a year discussion to give those performance goals. So that's called management. It's called supervision, proper supervision. So continuous improvement. Go ahead.
Yeah, so there is a little bit of confusion now between the appraisals and the level of feedback we can get to an employee. So what I understand that appraisal have a set date and time.
Mm-hmm.
So you have one-on-one with your direct report. You sit with him or with her and discuss whatever, every portion of this appraisal. But the different level of feedbacks you can give a feedback or what they call it, verbal coaching or documented coaching, first written, second written, or final written, and at any time. So there is no specific time for any level of feedback you can give to an employee. Is it correct?
Yes. Yeah. Direct feedback, and I mean, absolutely. I mean, if you give that kind of direct and authentic and real feedback consistently, then it doesn't upset anybody, and it's an organizational culture issue as well. This sounds crazy, but I once read an article that talked about how high-performing organizations, people were cursing a lot. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. So basically if you're cursing at each other and, that should be opposite. But what really the article was saying is that sometimes in some organizations have so positive, open, authentic culture that you can even curse, you can even, make fun of somebody, you can roast somebody, you can, and they are okay with it. In other words, the culture allows direct feedback. People have thick skin, they can handle it, they can take the feedback. And if you create that kind of a organizational culture where people just okay you saying, hey, I don't like what you're doing right now, and you should fix that or whatever, not just the supervisors but the peers also. If everybody can kind of give each other feedback and you have that kind of organizational culture, like I can tell you that at Saka Universities where I work as a COO, we our leadership team, sort of the four of us, we kind of feel like we are like brothers. And sometimes we argue, sometimes we are pretty frank with each other, and we tease each other all the time. I can't tell you how many times my bald head has been teased, or my accent or something like that. And that's just kind of keeping it real. It's just keeping like, hey, we are friendly. We can joke about each other, and that also helps then, with giving that feedback. And so it's a cultural building the right kind of culture of sort of a feedback oriented culture. And officially we call that learning organizations. Learning organizations are highly tolerant to people's mistakes. They look at mistakes as opportunities for improvement, and they don't look at it as a devastating, terrible, horrible things. So you have to have a tolerance to people making mistakes and tolerance to those opportunities, and an ability to authentically and openly share that feedback. And so that's where continuous improvement, you give extensive training, you drive out fear so that people don't feel like every time they do something bad, they're going to be fired. Remove the barriers so that people can have discussions and focus on self-improvement. Reward self-improvement and focus on it in an organization, embrace it, make it a cultural value so that people are continuously seeking to be better. And look for that and ask for that. They ask for support, ask for training. It's a two-way street, and that's positive, transformational management. People have to be participating in it. It has to be fair, and so that's, at least in my mind, the self-managing teams where people take full responsibility for their own jobs and their own performance to the point that they start managing themselves, so that the supervisor doesn't have to intervene all the time. To me, that's the goal. And so performance management has to be that continuous process of identifying, measuring, and developing the performance of individuals and teams, and sort of aligning their performance with the organizational goals. So that's ultimately, the model situation. Technology, like with everything, you can use technology to support that. You can use gaming, you can use social media, you can use a lot of different way of helping people. You can assign financial and non-financial goals, and you can have the system kind of alert you and keep you on track with those goals. Inform all teams and employees of their goals. Use IT supported tools like scorecards, HR scorecard, digital dashboards. Continuously, display, monitor, and assess goals. So, like for example, in one employment place where I was responsible for a call center or faculty tutoring center or academic facilitation, we called it, to help students to improve. We had it was a very large university with like 50,000 students. So we had faculty members who were available 12 hours a day to take phone calls, to tutor and help students. And I was managing it. And so this, call center environment. So I had a dashboard continuously in life. I could measure who is in the phone, who is not, and what they're doing, and different metrics that we had in place. And so I was able to share those metrics daily and immediately and all the time. And so We also had dashboards of student retention, student success scores, and a lot of different things that were computerized algorithm that would be able to get that feedback all the time, so that we would be able to measure it. And so I'm just giving you higher education examples because that's where my career has been. But yeah, I mean, it's possible to monitor everything and use computer tools to do it. So what is manager's role in performance management? Well, having the right philosophy. I talked about learning organizations having the philosophy of believing in people, believing in people's ability to improve and develop themselves. You can, there's theory X and theory Y. You can't be a theory X manager, and do positive performance management. So you want to be theory Y when you believe that people can motivate themselves, they can self-inspire. And so it's very, very important to choose managers who have that kind of right philosophy. When I interview for jobs, they ask me about my management philosophy, my leadership philosophy, and I explain that I consider myself a transformational servant leader, and I see myself as a servant to my employees, that I'm there to help and support them rather than I'm the dictator kind of a thing. Having the right on-job behaviors. Managers with their daily behaviors, they encourage positive performance environment. And so, if you just sit in your office and don't interact with people, they're not going to trust you too much. But if you go and, you demonstrate that you care about them, you demonstrate that you are interested in them as persons and not just their performance, and you create that kind of a environment where you can have conversations easily with them about their performance without hurting their feelings, that's when you are doing good performance management. And then the pressure is relieved, the performance appraisal doesn't become this difficult type of a thing. But if performance appraisals are difficult, that pretty much tells you that it's not working and that performance management is not in place. So it's kind of a good measure of temperature, if you will. Well, that's all I have to say about that. Like Forrest Gump would say, if you know Forrest Gump, if you saw the movie, Forrest Gump is the smartest Alabamian because he was from Alabama. If you haven't seen Forrest Gump movie, you should go and see it. It's an old movie, but he said, that's all I have to say about that. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Anyway, any questions? Anybody? Well, again, it's been an honor, and I appreciate and thank you for staying tuned in. There's a lot to discuss, and I know, and I apologize, that sometimes in digital format, when you are participating, it's hard to hear, and I have a little bit of a sinus infection, so my hearing is impacted by the sinus infection a little bit. So I apologize if I didn't hear your comments clearly. I tried my best, but don't take it personally. Don't get offended. I don't mean it. It's just difficult sometimes to hear through the speakers. So I appreciate you. It's going to be time for another quiz. I think I'm going to just have a couple of quizzes. I mean, it's like we had one already and another one. I don't want to quiz you to death, but I do want to give you a reason to read the book. So stay tuned. Pretty soon we're going to have another second quiz, and I'll post that in the class, and I'll give you ample time to do it. So nothing to worry about. It's just to motivate you to read the book. So please read the chapters. Don't just rely on what I say over here, although I hope that I have, covered. So yeah, I have uploaded all of the slides in the system. They're all up there. After last week lecture, I uploaded all of them. So you can find them in the system out there. I don't have it in front of me. I can't tell you exact. Okay, actually I do have over here. It's under general. There's presentation slides tab out there. And under presentation slides, you have all 18 chapters. So you should be able to find them out there under the class shell. Let me know if you can't find them. But they are there under the ebook, the textbook. Okay. Already, everybody, thank you again. It's been nice to hang out with you, and have a great weekend. You have somebody say something?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Professor, I'm saying something. Can you
Yes,
hear
go
me,
ahead.
Professor?
Say again.
Okay. Yes, I'm talking in respect of the last quiz.
Okay.
Actually, yes, I was having a great challenge with my laptop, and even right now in this class, you observe I'm using my mobile phone to connect, and it was very challenging. But I was assured that by Monday, I will be able to get access to the laptop. So
Okay.
I am able to submit that assignment, the quiz of the last one.
Yeah. If you still have access to it, go ahead and take it. And if you don't have access to it, I'll see if I can, because I don't remember right now if I put a due date on it to, close to access, but I think I left it open. So I'll accept you late submission. I mean, it's not, I just want you to be able to take it. So I'll make sure that I'll give you the opportunity to properly submit that.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
So I understand, very difficult to download things and write a paper on a mobile phone. It would be difficult, and uploading it is difficult on a phone. So I understand the challenge. I don't want to punish anybody. I want to give everybody an opportunity to complete the assignments. And you should be working on the course, paper, or the course paper, I think, first, and then case study next. So we are roughly at the midpoint or whatever of the term. So you should be, we are past the midpoint, I think, roughly. I need to look at, well, actually not quite, we are right around the midpoint right now. So yeah, this would be time when you want to start having your papers completed, so that you don't leave everything in a back end.
Okay.
Because I think, all right, because today is 8, I think the 8th session that we have, roughly, if I count them right. Okay, well, thank you all. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Okay. Bye, and thank you, Tomi.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Prof. Bye.